was the late 1980s when I had a near-death experience. The experience was so profound that it changed my life from that night forward. I would never think or feel the same again about many things. In only a few hours one night, my life was turned upside down. It was as though God had opened my eyes for the first time, although I could see previously just fine. For me, it was so extraordinary that I still remember it as though it happened yesterday. Prior to that night, I was working in the science field for a branch that worked primarily as contractors in the aerospace and defense field. I absolutely fell in love with science, so much so that I had decided to continue my education in the science field. They offered full tuition based on your grades, and I was excited, grateful, and looking forward to it. But that would all change. It was nearly 10 p.m. one night, as I was straightening up before going to sleep. My child had fallen asleep earlier in my bed, and I wasn't about to disturb that. As I got in pulling up the covers, I suddenly had this strong urge to get up and go to my closed bedroom door. I was still propped up on my elbow. I never did make it to a full lying position as I got up heading for the door. Even as I walked to the door, I was confused as to why I was even getting up. At the time, it seemed as though something inside of me had taken the lead, leaving me completely confused. Today, I believe it was the spirit within me leading the way. I opened my door, becoming immediately startled and overwhelmed, but in awe. Other than my bedroom, the rest of my apartment was missing, or gone and replaced with about a football-sized field. I could see there were people walking around in the distance. I was certainly alarmed, but more importantly, incredibly curious. I wanted to understand how this was possible and methodically searched my mind for answers, but to no avail. It was impossible for me to make sense of it, as I examined the lines around my bedroom door that were now exposed to the outdoors. There didn't seem to be an explosion or catastrophe, since the lines around the door were smooth and there was no debris. Plus, I heard nothing, and I didn't even recognize the field in front of me. Obviously, I knew something extraordinary had just occurred. Then I had this overwhelming, clear thought that came to mind, or was placed in my mind. I was given a choice. I could shut the door and go back to bed, hopefully remembering this as some kind of odd dream in the morning, or I could go into the field and find out for myself what had happened. I needed to know and chose the field. It was like me to do so. I looked back to check on my child again, but somehow had this overwhelming, comforting feeling that all would be okay. So I shut the door, heading toward the group of people in the field. I needed answers. When I got to the field, the group of people who I believe today were angels were pacing about as though they were anticipating something to occur. They certainly appeared like human beings. The group consisted of men, women, young, old, and even children. No one said anything. After observing them for a while, I became impatient and walked up to an older man, interrupting his pace and asking him what had happened. But he ignored me, moving around me. I wondered if he could even hear me. Then I approached a woman who was holding the hands of two children on either side of her. I walked in front of her, forcing her to stop. She glared at me annoyed, as though I was rude, as I abruptly blocked her way, stopping her. I now knew they could hear and see me. I felt embarrassed as she looked down at the children, lifting her hands slightly, moving away from me, and continued to pace with the group. I was taken back by their attitude toward me, as though I should have known what was about to happen, but I had no clue. I was frustrated and confused, so I moved outside of the group, continuing to observe them as they waited for something, although I had no idea what that was. And suddenly, the group stopped and peered up into this beautiful, clear night sky, dotted with stars, as I wondered what they were seeing, what they were looking at. I even moved to the middle of the group to try and get a better view, but I still saw nothing but the night sky. And suddenly, I, along with the group, lifted off the ground about several feet. Now I was scared, since I had no idea how that was possible. However, today, I believe we were all in a transparent orb. Then before I could scream, I, along with the group, began to ascend rapidly up into the night sky. I was terrified and basically frozen in place, wondering what had me or us, since I couldn't see anything. I could not imagine how any of it was even possible. We kept ascending higher and higher as I peered down when I got the nerve and could see the top of my apartment complex. By the time we reached space, I began to relax, since I agreed I had no control over any of what was happening. I was still trying to reasonably process it all, but that was clearly impossible. I noticed a warm, comforting breeze blowing through my clothes as I tried to relax. There was nothing else I could do, since I clearly had no control over the situation. We eventually passed planets and stars as we continued to ascend at an incredible speed through the universe. I wondered how it was possible that the air was so warm, since whatever had me was transparent, as we ascended even higher. Then we reached what appeared to be a thick section or band of space around the universe, as we defied physics, or the bending of space, traveling vertically through it, as though we ascended above and outside of the universe. I believe today that we, along with the universe, exist within the center of heaven. I could no longer see planets or stars, just space. Then we suddenly stopped. I watched the group, since they seemed to know what was happening. Everyone moved to the right onto a platform. I followed their lead. There was a misty, cloudy substance around my feet as I knelt down, trying to brush it away to see what I was standing on. But to no avail, as I soon gave up and stood up to see what was next. The entire group turned to face what appeared to be a large screen. But as I was about to join them, two people came behind me. Today I believe they were angels, one at each shoulder. And although I never added this to my book, since I felt at the time it was too disturbing, I saw my body separate, falling slowly backwards, with eyes closed into their hands. They were very gentle, but I was both disturbed and confused since I could see I still had a body. I believe I was now in spirit. I watched as long as I could as the two people carefully descended back to earth with my human body. When I couldn't view it any longer, I turned to face the large screen with the group. The hows and whys of life were being shown, and I remember how it all seemed so simple, but humans make it more complicated than it really was. Then we formed a line. Each one of us was going before something. At the time, I had no idea what this something was until it was my turn. I was agnostic at the time and believed God or a creator was a myth or nonsensical. But as soon as it was my turn, this incredible, powerful, brilliant, extraordinary, and somehow deeply loving light engulfed me. As soon as I peered into the middle of this light, I recognized this me, falling flat on my face and sobbing from tears of joy like a little child. The joy and happiness that I experienced is very difficult to put into words. Then he gave me permission to look upon his face. I knew how great this honor was as my tears of joy increased. I felt unworthy and so honored that I kissed both of his sandaled feet from gratitude. Even thinking about it today makes me still cry from joy. Then it was as though he separated from the light or turned the light off, standing before me and appearing like the man depicted from the shroud. There was no doubt. It was Jesus. Then he showed me another video or film concerning times of my life where I didn't make good choices. That wasn't very fun, as I felt ashamed and angry with myself for not making better choices, especially concerning how I had treated others poorly at times. But he had forgiven me, and I was overwhelmingly humbled by it. Then he told me I had to return, but I did not want to. He told me there would be a time in which my child would need me when no other could help my child. He told me he would take me back himself, as he took my left arm as we drifted or descended back to earth. An interesting observation that I had was that it seemed to take less time returning to earth than when I ascended to heaven. I'm assuming it may be based on the fact I was now in spirit, not human flesh, and that the spirit is quicker. We entered my apartment through the ceiling, as I saw my child and my body lying in bed. I had forgotten being separated from it and was terribly confused by it and all that had happened. He gently lifted me up in a cradling position and placed me back in my body. I immediately jumped out of bed trying to grab him as his extraordinary light left drifting through the window. It was about 2 a.m. My life changed from that experience. I now knew God was not a myth, but very real, although I was still wanting to understand as much as I could. He had told me during the near-death experience I would forget what I had seen on that screen. But I believe as the years went by, I began to remember, like pieces of a puzzle becoming complete. And I believe that was his plan. After taking my child to many doctors who had no clue as to what was causing my child's sickness, my child almost died one night. I sat on the floor all night, praying and begging God to help my child, me. Then when the morning came, it was like someone invisible whispered in my ear what was wrong. The voice was clear, telling me to take my child to the hospital for immediate surgery. It was a holiday weekend. When I told the ER doctor what was wrong with my child, he got so upset asking me how I would know that. I gave the name of one of the doctors from the group of many to the ER doctor so he would take what I said seriously. They verified it through the lab, and a surgeon was called in immediately, and my child's life was saved. It was Easter Sunday. From my near-death experience, my beliefs changed along with experiencing many spiritual happenings through the years. Some of those experiences are listed on my blog at elizabethdaniele.blogspot.com. There you will find many up-close, extraordinary, original, and authentic videos and photos. Soon after my near-death experience, I left my job and was trained to work in a shelter and completed a clinical hospital chaplaincy program, working as a volunteer chaplain. Later in life, I did go back to school online, attending a small university, finishing with a master's degree. I worked so hard during my studies, wanting to understand what had happened to me, so much so that I received summa cum laude. However, I chose a different secular profession, wanting to help others. Even after experiencing all that I have, I remain a skeptic, or at least I still have to see it to believe it if it is extraordinary. But in the end, it was what it was, regardless of skepticism. A creator existed, and we, the earth and universe, are indeed of him. I did not believe UFOs were real. I thought it could be explained away as a human or natural occurrence, overactive minds, or simply a hoax or deception. But when the Navy started to talk about seeing them, I silently prayed to God, wondering if it was from his kingdom of heaven. Then within 10 minutes of that prayer, I witnessed the Lord's ship outside my window. And from there, large orbs began to appear at my front door. God's kingdom of heaven has been observing the earth and our behavior since the start of time, and I doubt that will ever change. I believe God wanted me to document everything, as well as take videos and photos. Today, I am convinced that these UFOs, UAPs, are from God's kingdom of heaven, and anything malevolent connected to them are either a misunderstanding, dreams, sleep paralysis, or deception. And I don't believe this is about religion or me, as much as it is about a creator wanting us to know that he and his kingdom exists and how to get there. Best wishes, and God bless.